I'm honored to introduce tonight our speaker, Jim Wallis, New York Times bestselling author, widely recognized public theologian, renowned speaker, regular international commentator on ethics and public life, the founder, president, and editor-in-chief of Sojourners, author of 12 books, including America's Original Sin, God's Politics, The Great Awakening, and The Call to Conversion. He served on President Obama's White House Advisory Council on Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships and has taught faith and public life courses at Harvard and Georgetown University. He also prefers being oftentimes referred to as Coach Jim, having served for 22 seasons as a Little League coach for his two baseball-playing sons. And I'm always particularly, I got to interview Jim a number of years ago, and his count has gone up since he was here a number of years ago. I think perhaps arrested 24 times, something like that, somewhere in there. And so I can always respect someone who can make the sort of decision to engage in such public witness as that. So please give a very warm Nashville welcome to Jim Wallis.
Good evening. Good evening. How y'all doing? You might have thought you were coming to a talk tonight, and it will be a little bit of that, but I want to have a conversation. We've been having conversations around this country the past couple of weeks, and I've got some good news to report. Jesus apparently, mysteriously, maybe miraculously, has survived us Christians. I was with a friend this morning who's here tonight, my friend Callie, and she asked the question I get asked all the time. The big question. I'm hearing it from media outlets, I'm hearing it from international Christians around the world, I'm hearing it certainly from Christians of color in this country. And the question is, how can these Christians support this? How can these Christians say nothing or do nothing? How can these Christians allow this to go on without saying something? I see nodding heads. Have you heard that question? It's the right question. And if we take it seriously, then this crisis could provide some opportunity. In fact, some of you may know, smart students that you are, that the Chinese symbol for crisis are the two symbols for danger and opportunity. Danger and opportunity. Crisis, we hear the word all the time. Every day it seems to get more intense. It's a political crisis, of course, yes it is. It's not constitutional, yes it is. It's a moral crisis. I think it's a spiritual crisis. Abraham Lincoln, as some of you know, in his second inaugural, said that leaders should appeal to the better angels of our nature. You ever hear that? The better angels of our nature. We now have our national leader appealing to our worst demons. Angels versus demons. In California, I was out there and called that spiritual warfare. And of course, the one running this very hip center was kind of religiously illiterate. He says, spiritual warfare, wow. When did you come up with that? It wasn't me. Apostle Paul talks about spiritual warfare, and that's what we're in now. So I want to have a blunt conversation tonight, then an honest discussion about where, as Dot King, my mentor, would say, where do we go from here? This crisis, I'll tell you what this crisis really is, it's a defining crisis. Here's what's defining. This crisis is defining whether there will be a we going forward in this country or not. Or whether it's now going to be just always us and them. Is there a we going forward into a new America? Or is it going to be a battle all the time now between us and them? So, after the election of 2016, and in the first few months of the new administration, I was getting just endless phone calls from black pastors who were worried about the kids in their youth groups being targeted by the police, black pastors. Or immigrant families saying, we don't know if we'll be together tonight for dinner or not. My university president, where I teach, he called, they're not letting my Muslim students come back to school after their breaks and vacations. A senator calls and says, Jim, what do I fight? There's so much to fight. What do I fight? Ordinary people, pastors, students, and the question was, what do we do? What do we do? And they're calling me because they thought I would know. And I didn't know what to do. I didn't know. I had no idea. But the questions were waking me up every morning very early. I couldn't get back to sleep. And I'd go downstairs to be quiet for a while and just think and be silent and to pray. Sometimes you pray not sure what you're even praying for, but you need to know something. Finally, I was drawn to the book of Acts, first few chapters. Now here are Jesus' disciples. He's been killed. They were hiding in this upper room, terrified. And then Pentecost comes, some of you know the story, and they're full of courage, go to the streets and start to talk and preach and teach and heal. And I saw, like I hadn't seen before, when you go to the scriptures with new questions, even if you know the text, all these new stuff comes up. So I saw this, how everything they did, like Peter and John coming out of the gate as a disabled man, and he's asking for help, and they say famously, "Gold and silver have I none, but in the name of Jesus, rise up and walk." And he did. People got all stirred up. Kind of a big deal. Then they went to teach. 3,000 responded the first day. 5,000 the next day. And it says they did everything in the name of Jesus. That was there in every text. Healing in the name. Teaching in the name. Preaching in the name. Then they got arrested. I think it's 25 times. And the authorities weren't worried about these guys. They said, the text says, they were just ordinary, uneducated men. We did this thing at Harvard last week where they don't really think much of ordinary, uneducated. But that's the thought. These are not worth worrying about, these people. They're companions of this Jesus, but they're just ordinary, uneducated, but the people are getting all stirred up. They brought him in, they said, okay. They huddled in the corner and said, what do we tell them? How do we keep this from spreading further among the people? They came out and said, okay, you can go, do what you want, but don't use that name anymore. Don't speak in that name. We don't want to hear that name. The name is a problem. The name is stirring up the people. The name is dangerous. Don't use the name. Do what you want. Say what you want. Maybe form a faith-based organization, get some funding for a good cause. Stop using the name. And Peter in Acts 4, in that wonderful text says, whether you think it's right or wrong, we cannot not speak of all that we've seen and heard. We cannot ignore what we've seen and heard. We cannot not speak the name. And it hit me. The name. We're either not speaking the name or we have no idea what it means. Who was this Jesus? What did he say? What did he teach? Did he mean it? If so, what does that mean right now for us? So church leaders were calling, and one of them, Michael Curry, first black presiding bishop, Episcopal Church. He wasn't famous then, but you might have seen him. He did the royal wedding sermon. You remember that? That was Michael. He called and says, I'm just reacting. I'm just immigration policy. Refugees. My churches can't take refugees. I don't know what to do. Could I come down and talk? Is this a Bonhoeffer moment? Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the German theologian, young, brilliant pastor and theologian, who spoke as Hitler was rising up. History doesn't repeat, but it does rhyme sometimes. He came down for a dinner at 5 o'clock, and they kicked us out of the restaurant at 11 o'clock. We decided that what was needed was something that would help us reclaim Jesus. So we wrote a declaration, reclaiming Jesus. Now, I write declarations, but my young team, they do videos. Much more effective. They did a video on this that reached 5 million people, reclaiming Jesus. And only 20 of us elders, we're elders because we're old, only 20 of us signed it because we don't want pastors to lose their jobs over this, because it was strong. If you believe this, it said you must reject that. It's all here in the book, but then I took that declaration and did what it says we should do, which was for me coming back to Jesus. Even those who think we're Christians can get caught up in so many other things. What does it mean to believe that Jesus needs to be reclaimed because he's been silenced, sabotaged, hijacked, and that he's worth reclaiming? So I wrestled with the Gospels, and I found this book is just about 8 questions that Jesus asked or he prompted. 8 questions, his questions. And I think they go right to the heart of everything going on right now in this country. This isn't, I say in the book, don't go left, don't go right, go deeper. Go deeper. And if we're followers of Jesus, or even if we're interested, I began this trip with a speaking engagement in Washington, D.C., not book tour. These students, they're interns around Washington, working for places like Mimi worked in Washington, interns, University of Georgia. And I went over there, and we got there, and they were getting their group picture taken. And it was a hot D.C. night, and they got all bitten by mosquitoes. And I walked in, and they were looking miserable and glum and tired, and they had internships all day, and now they got this program tonight, and it's going to be by a Christian. Oh, jeez. And he's an old white guy with white hair, and oh, jeez. Very diverse group, racially, gender-wise, and I learned religiously. We got talking about these Jesus questions. Did he mean this? What did he say? The more we got talking, the room lit up. They were all formerly something, formerly Presbyterian, raised Catholic but no more, Baptist but no more. Nobody was currently, all formerly. But the interest in this Jesus lit the room up. After hands up everywhere, after 2 hours, the director said, well, okay, this is great. We've not had a conversation like this before, but you all got work tomorrow, and we've got to let our guest get home. He's got a book tour to do. So you need to end this now. And he said, okay. Then the line formed to hear personal stories, particularly from women of color in the room, but some white guys too, young white guys. And the stories were, I couldn't deal with religion anymore. Such hypocrisy was the word. Such hypocrisy all the time. And then such lack of response to such massive injustice. I couldn't deal with it anymore. So one after another, they told me their stories, and they said, but this conversation, how do I get engaged? How do I join this? How do I become part of this? I'm not sure about all the religious stuff, but boy, this, I would call it the interest in this brown-skinned rabbi who grew up in occupied Palestinian territory was taking over the room. The last woman, she was a young woman, African-American Muslim. She says, now, I'm African-American and I'm Muslim, so believe me, I'm like this now all the time. All the time. I have to protect myself. Go to the University of Georgia. I protect myself. I'm here in Washington, D.C., where they ban Muslims. I've got to protect myself. I've never heard a Christian talk like this. And he said, never heard a white person talk like this. But I tonight felt welcomed, included. Here's the thing, my imam and rabbi friends, they like it when Christians talk about Jesus. It makes them feel safer. And so we had this great conversation, how she says, and can I? I said, can you what? She says, can I hug you? I said, yeah, that's good. We had this conversation that was not the last speaking thing. It was, for me, the case study, a prototype of what's out there on the road. Jesus has somehow survived us. So let me just quickly go through a couple of the questions, and then I want to open it up to our panelists here, who I'm eager to hear what they think about all this, and then to all of you, because I want to have a conversation. We're small enough to have a conversation. This is not just listen and ask questions and maybe get a book signed. This is about a conversation that we need to have. So maybe the most important question that Jesus prompted to everything going on now is when a lawyer came to see him and said, what do I do to inherit eternal life? Jesus said, love God, love your neighbor. It's pretty simple. Love God, love your neighbor. Then the lawyer asked him a question. Now, I read this in the text, and I realized for the first time this was a Washington lawyer. I mean, I know this tone of voice. It wasn't, who is my neighbor? It said, exactly who is my neighbor? Let's narrow this down. Who is my neighbor? Then Jesus tells the famous parable of the Good Samaritan. How many of you heard the Good Samaritan story? Church people, not church people, it's a famous story. And of course, this man's beaten and robbed, and he's laying by the side of the road, and people pass him by. Two religious leaders passed him by. They were late for a vestry meeting, I think, something like that. But then others pass him by, but one person stops to help, and he's called the Good Samaritan. And of course, he takes his time, energy, probably at some risk, tough place, tough road. Dr. King called the Jericho Road a dangerous place. So, and he takes him to an inn, takes care of him, pays for him, makes sure he's okay, going to come back and check. So the story, of course, means somebody needs help, stop, take your time, energy, risk, help. That's great, but that's not the heart of the parable. Because the Judeans of Jesus' time didn't think there were good Samaritans. Samaritans were a mixed race. Stay away from them. They're dangerous. We don't like them. So Jesus, as his example of a neighbor, takes a Samaritan, one who is an other to the Judeans, and the Samaritan helps one who's other to him. Interesting. It's a brilliant parable to say your neighbor is the one who's different than you. Gustavo Gutierrez, the wonderful Peruvian theologian, I read all the commentaries and all these questions. Gustavo says, the neighbor is not in your path. To find your neighbor, you got to go outside your path. To seek your neighbor. Your neighbor is the one who's different than you. So right now in Washington, D.C., they are targeting the very people that Jesus says are our neighbors. Fear, hate, and what do fear and hate lead to? Violence. Targeting the very people Jesus says are our neighbors. Or, I wrote a column yesterday about the impeachment hearings inquiry. It was about truth. And I mentioned Jesus' debate with Pilate about the truth. Remember that? They're debating about the truth, and Pilate is losing the debate. And he says, oh, what is truth? What is truth? Sound familiar? There is no truth. There's only fake news. There's no such thing as truth. Strongmen, which our president used yesterday. Strongmen. He likes strongmen. Strongmen, autocrats, they always say that. There is no truth. So you have to, what do they say all the time? Believe me. Believe me. Believe me. Believe my truth, because there is no truth. The Washington Post is keeping track of all the presidential lies, and this is not the first president who's lied. Let me make sure you know that. But it's a record-setting 13,013 per day, I think, on average. But that's not the issue. The deeper issue is not the number of lies, but the undermining of the very idea of there being truth. That's the danger here. Because Jesus says, in response, you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Jesus makes a connection between truth and freedom. You'll know the truth, and the truth will set you free. And if you don't know the truth, that's the direction of bondage. Truth and freedom. Tell the truth. Find the truth. Know the truth. And from family life, if you've got kids, to national life, truth has to do with our freedom. Or, who is the greatest? Remember Jesus' Last Supper, he's with his disciples, and the big issue was who would get to sit next to him on his right side and left side? Who gets the place of honor, right? And even their parents got involved. You remember that in the story? As a Little League coach, I can relate to that, you know. How long my kid should play or play second base. And Jesus says, okay. You know how it is with the Gentiles, the rulers of the world, how they lord it over the people. They lord it over means wealth, power, winning, losing. They lord it over the people, but not so with you. Not so with us. We're going to do it differently. For us, the leader is the servant. The leader is the one who serves everybody else. The leader is the one who says, here's a crisis, here's a humanitarian, devastating, horrible catastrophe. So let's find a line, let's make a line to get people out of the problem, and the leader is in the back of the line. She or he forms the line and is the last one out. Let me show you what I mean, says Jesus, and he washes their feet. What a contrast that is. Even the idea of public service, a secular application of that, we've even lost that now. There is no thing as public service. And so, The last one here, what I call the final test of discipleship, was actually the text that brought me to my faith in Christ. I was kicked out of my little church at 15 in Detroit over the issues of race and the war in Vietnam. And I found my life and place in the movements of my time, the student movements. And I had left religion, and they had made it clear they were happy to see me leave. And so I wasn't religious at all. I was a secular activist. And all those years of organizing, mobilizing, beat up by the police, tear gassed most weeks, death threats in your dorm room, all that stuff, taught me that I wanted to be an activist. I wanted to change the world. But I wanted to have a foundation for that, a basis, how do I sustain that? What's the foundation for that work? And I was reading at the time, like we all were back then, Ho Chi Minh, Che Guevara, and Karl Marx. I was reading them all, we all were, and I wasn't satisfied. So I, probably because I got raised with his name, Jesus, went back to take a look. Probably never got quite shed of Jesus. So I'm on my own now. We had just shut down the university, Michigan State, where I went. We had the biggest march in Washington's Kings in '63. We were mobilizing, shutting down our schools. But then I was looking at the New Testament, and I saw these things called the beatitudes, the Sermon on the Mount. Blessed are the poor, and the poor in spirit, and those who are hungry for justice, and those who are peacemakers, and those who are meek, humble. I read it, and it just turned the world upside down. It was like an upside down world. Everything was now in reverse order. I had never heard a sermon in my life in my church on the Sermon on the Mount, not one. Yet it was the catechism for the early church. They taught all the new converts, this is the way, Jesus' way. They weren't called Christians, they were called people of the way. So that's interesting, I never heard that before. Then I got to this text, 25th chapter of Matthew, the Gospel of Matthew. I call it the it was me text. The it was me text. Jesus says, I was hungry. It was me. I was thirsty. That was me. I was naked, everything stripped away. I was a stranger. The word there in the Greek means immigrant, refugee. That's what the word means. I was a stranger. I was sick. I was in prison, and you weren't there for me. Lord, they said, when did we see you hungry, thirsty, naked, stranger, sick, or in prison? We didn't know it was you. Had we known it was you, we would have at least formed, a social action committee in our church or something, He says, no, it was me. As you've done it to one of the least of these, he said, the least of these, you've done it to me. I was hungry, and they kept ripping away my SNAP, my food stamps. I was thirsty, but I lived in Flint, in the black parts of Flint, and I couldn't get any water without lead in it. I was stripped away, everything was stripped away. My country, you couldn't grow food in the ground in Guatemala because of climate change, and there were gangs and cartels, and so I picked up my kid, and I walked with my kid all the way to the United States to get asylum, and they took my kid away and put him in a cage. It all got stripped away. I was sick. I don't have health insurance. I only go when there's an emergency, and they kept taking that away from me, and I was in prison. Now, white and black drug use is exactly the same, but incarceration is overwhelmingly black and brown, so I'm in prison, incarcerated. As you've done to the least of these, you've done to me. So, Jesus is pretty clear that the least of these are the most important to him. Now, Washington, D.C., let me tell you, I've had battles in White Houses with both sides, presidents and Congress, of people ignoring the least of these. The least of these are the least important in Washington, D.C. But now the least of these are being directly, deliberately attacked and targeted. So, when you hear all this and see all this and find this in the text, I've been wrestling for a year with these texts, you have to finally, in the end, conclude, and I know this word will sound strong and maybe irreverent, but let me just say, white nationalism is not just racist, it's antichrist. Dehumanizing immigrants isn't just a lack of compassion, it's antichrist. Demeaning women, sexual harassment, assault, trafficking, treating women as commodities isn't just sexist, it's antichrist. This isn't Republican, Democrat, liberal, left, conservative. This is policies and practices and words that every day are literally antichrist. And if we don't say that, then we are showing how far we have become disconnected from Jesus ourselves. So CNN calls. What do you think about these Christian musicians, they said, who won't talk about social justice issues in their music? Or pastors who now say, I hear it all the time, I can't talk about social justice because we're so politicized, my congregation is so divided, it'll sound so political. It'll sound so divisive. I can't do that as a pastor. And when he asked me that, I thought of this text in the Gospel of Matthew, almost as if Jesus might have said, now this is the last text before he goes to Jerusalem to have the confrontation with the authorities. So almost he would have said perhaps, well, I was going to talk today about, vulnerable people, marginal people, that problem. But, I'm realizing how divisive that would sound. We're so politicized now. So I don't really want to get political. I don't want to talk about that stuff because it'll be perceived as divisive. So let me just talk about how to get you to heaven instead. Oh, we can talk about abortion, gay marriage too, of course, but He didn't do that. He said, this was me. This was me. Where were you? Where were you? So to me, there's an enormous opportunity here to find our way back. And like I was in the student movement, to find my way forward to this radical character, this radical figure who literally came to change our lives so we could change the world. That was the whole point of it. Change our lives so we could change the world. Now there are these white evangelicals who have made their bargains with power, their Faustian bargains. Give us these policies, and we'll ignore all the rest. Just give us our political policies. Well, that isn't going to work for a growing number of people inside and outside the churches. There are cracks now in the wall. There are openings here and there. There are cracks now among white evangelical Republican women in the suburbs who are making shifts. Some of them drove into Texas megachurches during the last election with Beto bumper stickers on their cars, and their husbands and pastors got really mad, and they said, well, we believe that life is sacred both at the border and in the womb. young white evangelicals who are breaking with their parents over climate change and LGBTQ rights. Or in a call after the election I had with evangelical leaders, white, black, Hispanic, the white evangelical said, well, we didn't vote for Trump because of his bigotry, but because of other moral issues that we care about. And a black evangelical woman said, so I guess racial bigotry isn't a deal breaker for you. It was a deal breaker for the gospel. Always was. So, what's a deal breaker? What are the deal breakers for us? And so, one thing that I want you to do is, you ever see on football games in the end zones, there's a guy holding up a sign with a Bible verse? What's the verse? John 3:16. Hold it up. Look it up. Look it up. John 3:16. So I'm trying to start a little movement here. Go to the sports events, the arenas, political rallies, Republican, Democrat, whatever. Hold up this. Matthew 25. Look it up. Look it up. Read what it says. I think there could be a movement all over the country of people holding up. Just make it yourself on a piece of paper. Here's the hopeful sign. The last chapter is about, I keep wanting to move around with it. I got to keep this mic here. The last chapter is about, Jesus says, if you live this way, you'll be like salt and light, right? You've heard that, salt and light. I really dug into that, and I learned more than I knew before about how different they are. Salt is a preservative to preserve values that are so important for the health of our communal life, for human flourishing, trust and loyalty and fidelity and commitment and covenant and things, fairness, just core values that we're losing that are critical to the health of our common good, our communal life. And light shines in the darkness on things that are in the dark and are not being revealed and are wrong, are evil, are destructive. And the light says, no, we're going to expose this. Every generation, those of you who are students, you have a choice. Every generation decides what is no longer tolerable for you, no longer acceptable, no longer impossible to change. So I got stories in the book about a new generation, 800,000 young dreamers who came here when they were kids, undocumented with their parents, and they're going to change a broken immigration system. They're not leaving, they're not going anywhere. They're saying who they are. Or the Parkland kids, don't tell me that this will never change. The NRA controls and buys the Congress. No, it's going to change. We're going to vote. It's going to change. Or don't tell me that we can't change our energy sources and a warming planet. We're going to do it. Watch us. We're going to do it. A new generation decides what is no longer tolerable for them. Now, what's interesting is conservatives at their best, I don't mean militarized conservatives or corporatized, but conservatives at their best, they want to preserve things. Core values, important values. So this is something that the best of conservatism would want to do. And then progressives want to shine the light on what's wrong and change it. So this isn't left or right. This could pull us all in. How do we preserve what we're losing? And how do we shine a light on what is wrong? I think there's a chance now to use this crisis to bring us back. For those of us who want to follow this Jesus, to bring us back to see what he said, what he meant, and what that means. So it's bringing me back. It's bringing a lot of people to a conversation that I love to talk to about this stuff. You know, the largest religious affiliation in the country now is those who check none of the above, you know. They're called the nuns, none of the above. I was at Georgetown where I teach, and it's Catholic school, so I said, you know, I love the nuns. And they said, oh, me too, you know. And I said, no, I love those nuns too, because when I would go out, when I was very young, speaking in all these Christian campuses, I would go out. I came here 10 years ago, in fact, and there was always 2 rows of Catholic sisters in the front. And I said, sister, why are you here? Well, we're local, Jim. I said, yeah, but why are you here? Well, this is a conservative place, and we thought somebody should have your back. I've had nuns for bodyguards for years, you know. So I love those nuns, but the N-O-N-E-S, I love the nuns. They don't want to affiliate with religion because they don't like what we're saying or not saying, doing or not doing. But they're open. They most believe in God or something. They want their lives to make a difference. So why would they want a religion that doesn't make a difference? So I'm actually very aware of the danger right now to marginalize people. More danger. Let's be clear, Donald Trump isn't the cause of all this. He's a consequence. He's revealing what's been going on and growing for a long time. And elections are very important, but that won't change all this overnight. The healing of the nation is now necessary. How do we make sure there's a we going forward and not just an us and a them? People of faith are the ones who know that hope is deeper than optimism. One of my mentors, Desmond Tutu, taught me that a long time ago. Optimism is how you feel and what happened today and on the news and cup half full, half empty. Hope is a decision you make because of this thing called faith. Hebrews says faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. We're going to need the kind of hope going forward that is a decision we make no matter what happens in elections. Because hope, I believe, is believing in spite of the evidence and then watching the evidence change. And keep holding up your sign. Thank you very much.